Good afternoon and welcome to this augmented reality edition of About Everything with demographer Neil Howe. Before I hand things off to Neil, I just want to let you know if you do have any questions, please submit them on the QA box on the Hedgeye website and we'll try to get to them in about 15 or 20 minutes or so. We're going to try to keep everything to about a half hour in total, so won't take too much of your time. That being said, Neil, take it away.
Can we designate this as a hot spot?
I don't know. Let me see.
Do you see any Pokemon activity?
No, there's nothing here.
Nothing here.
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay.
We'll
maybe if we're interesting and they'll come. So. Yes, augmented reality. There's been so much hype, over the last couple of years about virtual reality, the purchase of Oculus Rift by Facebook, and just the development of these big consoles and the testing it out and people feeling nauseous and but alternatively feeling incredibly immersed, and what is by all accounts. I went on one briefly when I was in Los Angeles, one of these test things. It is amazing.
Yeah.
What they say, you go to cliffs, you really feel you're about to, fall over this thing. They do have this latency problem, though. People also feel nauseous because it doesn't keep up with your vision. But the thesis of my piece is that it's augmented reality, not virtual reality, that's going to be the big winner in the years to come. Yeah. And in fact, this is kind of the sleeper. Less so now with the rise of this Pokemon Go and how popular it was. As we point out in our piece, in our first week, Pokemon Go as an app was downloaded more times than any other app in history. Yeah. So now everyone is sort of familiar with augmented reality. And as we point out in our piece, augmented reality is sort of an interesting development. When you consider the various ways in which we use artificial intelligence and sort of digital interfaces to sort of connect to reality. Because on the one hand, you have a continuum. On the one hand, you have things which are have lots of verisimilitude, extremely realistic, things such as Oculus Rift, what we call virtual reality. And then on the other hand, you have at the other extreme, you have what we call schematic interfaces. These would be things like a drone screen where you're simply, maybe you'd actually see the ground on a drone screen. But for example, you think of a pilot simulator or a Waze screen. Often you see this on GPS. It's a way in which you interact with your reality, but it doesn't. None of it actually looks real. So on those two extremes, what we point out is that there's this middle area where what you see is real, but it also allows you to interact with the real world at the same time. That's the sweet spot. That's augmented reality. And if you look at our piece, we actually have a lexicon about reality tech. So you can actually categorize these various different. You have what's called mixed reality, which is like the Microsoft HoloLens, where you actually get to it's like virtual reality, but the virtual reality is placed in the real world. So you actually can walk around the table and look at the castle that you've created from many different angles and do that socially. But I think what's fascinating is, and what we try to point out here, is all the different ways in which you can use augmented reality, obviously for entertainment and games and leisure activities, but in so many other ways. Translating signs when you're in foreign cities, figuring out how to walk from one location to another, identifying things you don't understand. They have these new apps now that you can, they memorize important landmarks anywhere in the world. So in any city you're in, you can just hold this thing up. Yeah. It'll recognize a landmark and give you the whole, label it and give you the whole history of it.
I used the, one tool I found interesting was the Lowe's painting app.
Right.
So you can just hold it up and see what it's going to look like.
And the same thing too when you go into Lowe's and Office Depot, to actually take this piece of furniture or this appliance and actually picture it in your own home, and it will actually show it there for you. A whole variety of fascinating ways of interacting. I think what's interesting is that this was first pioneered, you remember, with the Google Glass. Yeah. Which tanked due to an unrelated and unfortunate problem which to me, the problem with Google Glass and the reason why it became stigmatized was the invasion of privacy, right? No one wants to talk with someone or have someone interact with you socially if you figure they may be actually recording your conversation.
Yeah.
To me, that was the big downside of Google Glass.
Well, and now one interesting thing about Google Glass is that in the healthcare application, because I'm a healthcare analyst for those who don't know, is Dignity Health is a large health system in California, and they're actually using Google Glass in the exam room, and they have scribes on the other end to document all the electronic medical record information. So the patient has to sign off, and they're basically volunteering, that they know that they're giving up their privacy. But I can see how beyond that type of setting, it may not be that applicable.
Here's where I think Google Glass is going to go, and they're going to reintroduce it, by the way. Google has not lost interest in it. They're going to reintroduce it. But I think they understand a lot better the kind of social dimension of it.
Absolutely.
And so I think what they will do, and I think this is always the right positioning for them, is this is a professional tool. So in other words, people in a professional capacity will wear it. Mm-hmm. If you're a fireman, if you're a police or law enforcement officer, if you are, if you're doing something in an official, if you're a doctor, if you're a physician, whatever you are, you can wear this thing and be trusted, right?
Yeah.
Because you're under a code of ethics and so forth. What creeps people out is the fact that just at a party or someone at the office.
Exactly. Right now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of making me nervous. Although pretty soon they're going to have these things, with contact lenses and so on. So it'll be hard to know if you're doing it. But I do believe that when that happens, there will be invented a very severe set of social rules, really inflicting big penalties on people for doing that. So I think what was interesting is how it's now being introduced through mobile phones, phablets, and even tablets. And this is, by the way, one of the big beneficiaries. You're thinking about, when you think about the future of Apple, we have you can make a table. Here are some really horrible things about Apple's future, right? I mean, the whole global cell phone demand is dying down, particularly at the high end, and the wireless companies are no longer subsidizing the new purchase. I mean, you have all this stuff that's like really bad news for Apple. And by the way, what's their new big invention? All of that stuff, right? But on the other hand, there's some good things. I think cashless payments and the fact that Apple has an inside road there is really good for them. And I think this is another great thing, okay? Augmented reality, we had an estimate in here somewhere that Pokemon Go alone is expected to generate a couple $2 billion in revenue for Apple. They didn't even invent the thing.
They didn't have to do anything.
They didn't have to. They just ride this thing. So I think that, and obviously this will be Samsung. It'll be everyone who does it. I think also it's for the phablets and the tablets. The tablets actually could get a new shot in the arm. If you are a mechanic working on engines, and you want a big screen, right? You want to be able to look at that thing and identify every part on that engine, right? Yeah. You probably want a big tablet to do it. And I think there are a lot of professional and applied uses where you'll see suddenly these big tablets having, a much greater utility, right? For very detailed interactive activities. Sure. So, I think this is the wave of the future. I never like to spend too much time on discussion. I like to get to Q&A, but I would point out a couple of things that I think are a couple of deeper trends which this is riding, and one of them is, and I regard this as very much a generational trend. And it's what we see in so many areas of our social life today, and that's gamification. Everywhere in our life today, we see employers and producers, service providers interacting with their employees and their customers through gamified interfaces. Yeah. You now see it at Target now. They have games where checkout people can actually play a little game and actually improve the efficiency of how they're doing, right? And it's very important, by the way, that people who study games say you don't want to attach too much money to it. It can't be too much of a money reward. Then people get stressed out. It's no longer fun anymore. Actually, it's better if it's just a kind of more of a nominal reward and kind of a social thing. You kind of celebrate who's ever best. But you see the same thing now in And how do people track their finances? How do people track how their body's doing? This is the whole quantified self movement, using all the wearable tech, where you're looking at your pulse and your blood and your, it's.
You invite your friends and you try to beat each other's steps and
exactly.
who burns the most calories and that type of thing.
That kind of thing, and you see this as well in training. The military now has games for most of their weapon systems to train on. And you see increasingly when we talk about, I remember several years ago when you looked at Flight Simulator, everyone thought, well, that was a game about flying a plane. Well, the real joke, of course, is that increasingly that's not the game. That is flying a plane. That's how we fly our drones, right? The future of our military will be interacting with planes through gamified interfaces. That's also the way we're going to be doing things in factories. Right, we're going to be pouring, molten steel into moldings and so on. We're going to be doing it through everything. We're going to be doing increasingly will be through this digital interface. And I think that augmented reality has to be seen as a way of universalizing this new way in which we interact with our environment. We talked a little bit earlier about how it could actually pose problems for kids now, right?
Yeah.
Growing up without any kinesthetic learning, or any sense of touch, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure
Heads down, they're outside, but they're looking at their phones. Yeah.
Right, and so this is a problem, it's a developmental problem, which is why, by the way, in families with parents working in the digital industry are the ones most likely to send their kids to Waldorf schools. Where they're completely prohibited from doing. You look at Waldorf schools, where they're most popular: Seattle, Palo Alto, Silicon Valley, Boston 128.
Surprise.
Yeah, surprise. So I think we are aware of this danger. I think the idea that there is a developmental challenge with too much digital too early. In fact, New York Times actually coined a recent term, which I thought was good. You remember throughout much of the OOs, starting around 15 years ago, where everyone talked about the digital divide and the fact that people with lower incomes and people with underprivileged backgrounds weren't getting enough contact with digital interfaces. Well, the New York Times about 3 years ago coined a new term. It's called the reverse digital divide. And it's the fact that they actually found now among the higher status households with the most education and the highest incomes were most likely to have limitations on how long their kids spend with digital devices. Whereas apparently people in other households didn't care how long their kids spend. So we actually have it's swinging around the other way.
Yeah,
right?
It's like a barbell, too much or too little.
Too much or too little. But I think this is a real indicator where society is going, and it's one part of a new world of sort of ambient intelligence. Where we have this stuff all around us, and we're going to be interacting with it. So.
Okay, great. Well, want to get to Q&A. Again, if you have any questions, please submit them on the website. We'll try to get to them. Got about 10 or 15 in the queue, so let's get started. Neil, are you saying the hype surrounding virtual reality is overdone and the true future is augmented reality? You kind of already pointed to that, but maybe just elaborate a little bit. What are the flaws in virtual reality, or why is it so far off? Well,
the problem with virtual reality is that virtual reality, by its very nature, tends to take you away from the real world. It's immersive. It's not very good at actually interacting with the real world. Virtual reality is great for entertainment, right? It makes a wonderful Dungeons and Dragons game, right? Or an open-ended movie. Well, the great thing about virtual reality is that ultimately you'll be able to go into a movie and walk around the set and see it from any character's vantage point.
Yeah.
You can join the villain, shooting from the car, or go back and join Clint Eastwood as shooting him down, or however you want to do it. It's a wonderful feature. It also has certain training strengths. I know NFL players now go into virtual reality on the field, and they actually they can walk around and see where everyone else is kind of set up and how they're moving through their patterns. But you can't actually interact very well with others. I know Mark Zuckerberg has a vision for Oculus Rift where he calls it social virtual reality. But as I point out in this piece, the facts on the ground are probably the #1 application of virtual reality over the next several years is going to be adult content. Okay? I mean, I'm sorry, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
So that's the limitation on it. And I think what's great about virtual reality is that it merges us with the real world. It helps us actually interact with it.
I think it's great. I mean, you know, you just, in my town, you go walk around on a Saturday afternoon and you see kids, groups of kids walking around playing this game that, you know, you never would have seen before. And they're out there talking to each other and they're getting exercise. I mean, it's pretty interesting. It gets people out and about.
You can imagine a virtual reality, an augmented reality game that would be quite physical. You know, it'd actually take you out, you know, onto golf courses now that no one's using them anymore, right?
Yeah.
Have all these millennials run around
Exactly.
on them and actually use all that space. One other actual use too is in retail. This could remake retail. In other words, imagine an augmented reality store where you'd have all the in-store analytics, you'd have personalized pricing. You wouldn't have to have any labels on the products anymore. You just take out your cell phone and it would tell you exactly what it is, give you all the reviews, give you all the specs on that product.
Yeah.
So it would reduce the costs and increase the ability of the customer to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting. All right. Let's see, does this massive interest in Pokemon Go tell us anything about the long-term durability of augmented reality? Is this a game changer? Is it, you know, is it really going to take off?
Pokemon Go itself doesn't, but I do think it's an indication of how easily popular it can be. And I think it gives greater visibility. The great thing about Pokemon Go is it makes everyone more accustomed to using their mobile phone in this way, right? So I think they're much more accustomed now thinking about, well, there are other devices like this that I can download. It's very hard actually to get a new technology and get people used to a new technology. I think the single best thing about Pokemon Go is it gets people used to the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm personally excited to see we were talking about this
Tell
earlier.
me some of your experiences on Pokemon Go.
Hey, you know, so there's one question asking what level I am, and I may or may not be a 25, but you know, that's an aside. But no, it's been interesting. I mean, I definitely got caught up into hype. I mean, look, I'm a millennial.
How many contests have you actually engaged in? I know some people.
There is a gym at the entrance to High Ridge Park that I tried to take down a couple days ago, but I was unsuccessful.
You were unsuccessful.
I was unsuccessful. But no, it's an interesting game. I mean, for someone in my generation, you know, for better or for worse, who grew up with the card game and collected these cards and was fascinated by it, it's you know, or had the Game Boy game. It's a really interesting, you know, update, and it's enjoyable. You know, no shame.
The sweet spot for Pokemon Go users is, someone asked me that when it first came out. I hadn't even heard of it, and they said, well, you know, guess what age bracket? And I said, well, I imagine it's about age 24 to 32. And they said, how do you know that? And I said, it's obvious because they were the ones playing it as card games when they were little, right? And so we already know all the names of those creatures.
But I would say, I mean, I've come across people who are, you know, 10 years old, and I've seen 50-year-olds play it. You know, it's really amazing
I have
how
been
it's got
tempted
on.
myself.
You should try it. Give it a shot. All right. Your technology sector has a long call on Intel. Does your stance on AR play into that? And maybe along the same lines, to another question, is there any publicly available way to invest in augmented reality outside of maybe Nintendo?
Nintendo, assuming that they can, you know, leverage what their kind of nephew company created, right?
Yeah.
I think Intel is a good one. We were just looking actually. You know, it's hard to say because we're still at a nascent stage. I would say the most important thing is to be aware of it and to stay abreast with the developments. I know that Google itself is actually working on a new a new AR reality project called Google Tango, which has actually just been implemented by Lenovo. You know, it's what they call their Fab 2 Pro. But it's a form of augmented reality where you can gauge distances on a map and do incredible things actually in three-dimensional space. I think you're going to see a lot of movement in this area. I do think if there's one, again, we're talking about definitely going to help the future of mobile phones long term. So again, I put that in the plus column for Apple. Look, right now when you're looking at FANG, you know, all of those high flyers, and people are wondering, you want to keep track of what are the pluses and minuses. There's a big plus that's developing. I think if you're thinking about the future of tablets, this could be a big plus for those. Tablets have been a pretty depressed area of the market. With not a lot of growth prospects.
Well, I think from the professional perspective, like you mentioned before, from a mechanics view, but also just from a DIY.
Right.
Just being able to look at it and understand what you're seeing. If it's a hobby or whatever. It's helpful.
I think one of the interesting things too is when you're looking at hotels and entertainment and so on, is that everyone's going to have to integrate themselves with this new technology. For instance, if you're Disney and you're Disney World, all of the big entertainment companies are actually getting more and more revenue from in-person experiences. That's one of the most fascinating things. Less from anything that can be duplicated. The digital music, even films, as we were pointing out a couple of weeks ago, is kind of shrinking. What's going up? The actual physical theme parks. That's like expanding in all these companies, right? Because people pay for that.
Yeah.
And so when they're in your theme parks, how are they going to navigate? Well, you're going to have to invent a great augmented reality thing so they can see wherever they are. They know exactly which lines are open and what's going on, and they get a little augmented map, right? So I think the development of augmented reality to accompany anyone who's offering entertainment or anyone in the hospitality business, even a large hotel. How do I get to the swimming pool? How do I get to the conference room? So there's a lot going on now. The profits are being made obviously by small private companies. I mean, they're all the software developers and so on. But I do think it's worth keeping track of the big public companies. The Marriotts and the Hyatts and so on. Who is doing most to actually keep up with this and retooling themselves accordingly.
Yeah. You mentioned Disney, and I was at a healthcare conference a couple weeks ago, and there was one entrepreneur there who's only invests in the most bleeding edge technology in healthcare, kind of used to own a bunch of hospitals and kind of got out of that business and made his money there. And he was talking about, if you what you said, you go to Disney World, Disneyland, and they know where you are. They know what stores you go to, how long you're waiting in line.
Everyone's wearing this little band.
Yeah, and you think, maybe it gets me ahead in line, but really they're tracking your every move.
Opens my hotel door for me.
Yeah, exactly. But when we were talking earlier about healthcare and preventative medicine and ACOs and changing payment models, the ability for a primary care physician or healthcare system, if you're part of an ACO as a patient, to track your movements, to be able to collect that data, obviously being a two-way road, in terms of personalized medicine and collecting your own information. But I think that has huge potential for augmented reality.
There's a big data, and the time will come when the big HMOs like a Kaiser, right, will have all the data about you. When you come to see the doctor, they'll already know what you ate last week.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll have all your McDonald's receipts, and they'll say, I don't know, you should have been more careful with your diet last month. They'll know more than you do.
You'll be like a piece of inventory in a supply chain that they just track with an RFID chip. Hey, maybe that's the best thing.
Well, it's the wave of the future.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. In your write-up, you mentioned all-encompassing system that uses in-store analytics to personalize pricing. Do you see regulators being an issue here, or with any other aspects of AR?
Personalized. I don't know which area they might want to regulate. Personalized pricing has been a little bit controversial because a lot of people think that it actually is price discrimination. I know there's a whole sort of, Patman Robinson debate that goes back decades on whether, personalized pricing actually should be illegal.
Yeah.
A lot of people are actually shocked by it. We actually looked at polls once and found personalized pricing. Everyone does it. Safeway does it. They have all these stores now have personalized pricing programs. But when you actually go out in a public poll and ask people, is it okay that some people get different prices than another? An overwhelming share of Americans. That's completely unfair.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea of a marketplace is there should be one public price, right?
Yeah.
And it's what economists usually assume. There's one price out there. This used to be called price discrimination. And if I have information, if I can rank all of my customers, for instance, by income, and give them a separate price accordingly, most people would consider that, if not unethical, illegal. So.
Yeah, that's true. So you kind of hit on a bunch of different sectors. Which sector do you think is going to have the most immediate, which sector do you think AR will have the most immediate impact on, in terms of disrupting and transforming?
I think it's really going to be, and I hate to still be in the kind of virtual reality world, but it's going to be leisure and entertainment.
Yeah.
I mean, I see the first industries going to be impacted by it are touring, hotels, theme parks, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's going to be, a lot of it is going to be in the DIY market. There's going to be apps that you're going to sell through, nominal fees and ads, but they're going to help people just navigate their own experiences. It's a huge consumer surplus area, for small developers. It'll make a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a great, some of this revenue is going to go to these, big VCs.
Yeah.
Are going to be sponsoring a lot of these companies, and some of the big funds, some of the big VC funds that's actually, funding a lot of these developers. A lot of it will go there. When it comes to public companies, entertainment, hospitality, and I would add mobile phones and telecoms. Remember, telecoms, all the stuff is through digital.
Yeah.
It's all go through wireless digital. So
Yeah.
this is going to be great for the Verizons and AT&Ts as well.
That's true.
It's going to be a lot more demand, a lot more information. It's
A lot
going to be
more
going
data.
back, a lot more data, and they
Yeah.
make their money off the data.
Yeah. So I guess put your forecaster hat on for a second. Augmented reality is today, right? When does virtual reality take hold? When does Oculus at Facebook, when does
It's
that
already
hit?
taking hold. Maybe I should restate my argument.
Yeah.
Virtual reality is actually more mature than augmented reality, in my opinion. I mean, virtual reality it's already out there.
Yeah.
They're already developing movies, they're already developing experiences, it's out there. You can go to a store now and buy your Oculus Rift thing, and the problem is you need a really good graphics card if you want a great experience. I mean, no, it's
Yeah.
expensive. You got to think about how you're going to set it up, but it's out there. It's already. I'm just saying the trajectory for virtual reality is here, and I think augmented reality is going to be steeper because there are just so many more uses for it in the
Yeah.
world. That was
Yeah,
my
that
only
makes a lot of
point.
sense.
It's not that one's coming before the other.
Yeah.
I think in the long term, there are going to be all kinds of other digital things which we haven't talked about. A lot of this is facilitated by the Internet of Things, and I will probably do a piece on it at some point that we'll have on about everything. But I'd like to do something at some point on what's called ambient intelligence. The fact that all of the devices around us will be learning from our behavior and actually responding to us. Even this cup will kind of get a feel for how warm I like my coffee, and this pen will kind of know. I mean, everything will kind of know me.
Yeah. It's a little creepy, but
Yeah, a little creepy.
but also really cool.
But you think of the
exciting.
Nest,
Yeah.
the Nest thermostat.
No, yeah, it gets
which-
used to your habits.
Yeah, it
You
gets
don't
used to
have
your habit. I think, and it's not just they're going to be communicating with me, they're going to be communicating with each other, and they're going to have algorithms for just looking at patterns and just figuring out what works best. It's going to be a little,
Yeah.
and then it becomes self-aware, right? And then we really have to work.
Yeah, and people will standoffish, and then next thing you know, it's second nature.
And here you have a real generational divide. And I'll just say personally, I want dumb devices. Okay,
Yeah.
I don't want devices to think at all. I want to know. I want to set the heat where I want it.
Sure.
I don't want that thing moving on me.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where I want it. I want it at 72 degrees. I don't want anything else. And obey me, please. Right.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that younger generations will be much more used to the idea of having these things, not really caring necessarily whether they need to specify explicitly.
Think
what
for
it is.
me.
Yeah, think for me a little bit. That's all right. I'll work around it.
Yeah. Okay. And I think this will be our last question. You referenced that the technology consulting firm DigiCapital predicts that the AR market will be 4 times more lucrative than the VR market by 2020, generating $120 billion in annual revenue. Do you think this is possible? And then if so, what companies specifically do you see benefiting? Kind of answered the latter question already, but maybe on the first.
I mean, again, this is an expansive estimate, and again, it takes into account all the different kinds of cash flows, flows we were talking about. Ad revenue, device revenue from the cell phone, and obviously the digital fees and the wireless. Digital fees from the wireless is interesting. You think of how much these devices could be used, and okay, well, it can lead to the sale of a few more devices themselves, but all of it's going to require this constant, huge amounts of data going back and forth.
Yeah.
And that in itself is going to be a significant boost to the telecom.
Yeah, well, I think what Nintendo is generating $200 million a month. That's just a number I heard or I read in an article somewhere. But if that's the case, that's an incredible amount of money to be generating so quickly. So, anyway, all right. Well, that's all the questions we have for today. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Neil as always. And catch you back here next time.
Great.